Hello and welcome to our special broadcast. I'm Parikshit Luthra. The US presidential election campaigning has entered the last leg with less than 24 hours to go for voting to begin. Most opinion polls are pointing towards a dead heat between Democrat nominee Kamala Harris and Republican candidate Donald Trump. It will be an all-out campaign blitz for Harris and Trump across key battleground states today. It all boils down to the 7 swing states that account for 93 electoral seats and hold the key to the White House. Trump currently holds a slender edge over Harris when it comes to the opinion polls of swing states. However, all these polls come within a margin of error and must be taken with a pinch of salt. Both candidates stand at the cusp of history. Trump, if he wins, will become only the second president in America's history to have lost power and then staged a comeback. Grover Cleveland did that 132 years ago. Harris, meanwhile, has her eyes set on becoming the country's first woman president. The turnout of early voters has been high this time around. According to University of Florida's data, over 75 million Americans have already cast their ballot. This is nearly half of the 160 million votes cast in 2020, the highest turnout in US presidential polls history. To take this discussion ahead, we're joined by Singh, former diplomat and former secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs. Senior journalist Brian Bonner, also with us. Also on the program, Christopher Clary, Associate Professor of Political Science at the University of Albany and a non-resident fellow at the Stimson Center with us as well. Ambassador Singh, let's begin by talking about Kamala Harris. She has a razor-thin edge in this election against Donald Trump. But how do you think Kamala Harris has actually evolved from Joe Biden's running mate in 2019, 2020, to becoming the Democrat presidential candidate just a few months ago?
You see, her problem was that she had to both distance herself from Biden, because Biden is one of the most unpopular presidents at the end of the term, and at the same time not appear ungrateful, because he's, after all, made her the heir to his legacy. So it's a game. She has played it well. She's not really openly criticized anything that Biden had done, but slowly she's distanced herself. You take Israel, for instance. She did it by not going to Netanyahu's address to the Congress, even though as vice president, she was supposed to preside over it. So she's done those things to convey it subtly. But even then, in some places, she will probably suffer because of it, because in Massachusetts, in Michigan, there's a huge number of Arab and Muslim votes, which may not come to her, normally would come to the Democrats. But in this case, because of the Biden policy on Gaza, on Israel, on not apparently appearing to contain them, may not come to them. But at the same time, you never know. They're not going to vote for Trump either. So sometimes these votes, that's why this election is very difficult to predict, because there are Republicans who may not vote for Trump, but will not openly say so. There may be people in the middle who are just shifting. Out of the women vote very clearly, and that's what the Iowa, the latest vote out of polls out of Iowa indicated, that the women are voting in much larger numbers than they voted for Biden or for anyone else before this, which includes white women. So now these are all new elements, and therefore the polls may or may not be able to register. And one last point. In the last elections in 2022, the Democrats overperformed. Whereas it is correct that in the past, Biden has overperformed. But in more recent times, it's different because the Democrats did overperform. They didn't lose the majority in the Senate.
All right. So if we were to believe latest polls, Christopher, it seems that Kamala Harris may just win Iowa, and it is considered a bellwether state in this election. Do you think the women voters in America hold the key to the White House in the last lap, in these last 24 to 40 hours?
You know, the problem we have in the US is polling is broken. People don't answer their phones. Traditional methods don't work. We've had to put together panels, trying to use online methods, other things. And we're driving in the dark here. I think the census, it's quite close. No single poll, including a recent one by Ann Seltzer, a famous pollster in Iowa, that showed, somewhat to people's surprise, that she found Kamala Harris ahead. No single poll tells us anything definitive, and so we have to wait, I think, until the votes are counted in this case, just because of this era we're entering into where we don't have the old survey tools that used to work and still work to a large extent in places like India and Pakistan, where I sometimes do survey work.
Right. But Christopher, also to speak to you about Asian Americans, also Indian Americans more specifically, how important is this as a voting group in the United States this time around in this election and in the 7 battleground states?
You know, there's a famous book on Indian Americans in the U.S. called The Other 1%, right? This is a growing, important minority group in the U.S. We have good polling. Milan Vaishnav and others at Carnegie have been working, Devesh Kapoor, others, to poll Indian Americans. They are still strongly Democratic, but there has been some erosion in the asymmetry of their support for the Democratic Party, according to those polls. So, you know, this is still a small group that is unlikely to sway the vote in any given state. But to the extent that some of these states might be very close, who knows, any single constituency could matter in a close election. But it's a vote that matters for American politicians, more so at the level of the House of Representatives, though, than at the presidential level.
Right. Brian, if I were to ask you, by when do you actually expect to see a final results or some of the key news outlets in the United States to call the election, considering it's so close and it's going to go down to the wire? Do you think it will take longer than usual for news outlets to call this election?
If it is close, but I'm gonna go out on a limb, and you can play it back if I'm wrong, because I've been wrong before, but I don't think it's gonna be close for many reasons that your speakers have already discussed. I think it's breaking. I think it's breaking in Kamala Harris's way. We will know because, you know, I think North Carolina and Michigan, couple of the swing states are very quick, or Georgia, I believe, is the one very quick at counting, and I think we'll know from there. I think Iowa was the shocker. I think that if the Iowa poll was correct, I think that shows that the polling is off. We've seen huge numbers of early voters, huge numbers of women. They break for Donald Trump. Of course, the men break for. They break for Kamala Harris. Of course, the men break for Donald Trump. So if I had to predict right now, I don't think it'll be close. I think we'll know Tuesday night. I hope so as an American, because even though I live in Ukraine, I believe that it'll be very nasty if it's very close and very contested, and we get into another situation like 2020 or the year 2000.
Right. I'm going to come back to you to especially understand what could be America's approach to the Ukraine war. But just to ask the motivations of the two candidates, Ambassador Casey Singh is talking about Trump. We had Michael Wolff, the author of the Trump trilogy, on CNBC TV 18 last week, and he said the only reason why Trump wants to be re-elected is because he wants to stay out of jail and wants to be the most famous man in the world. Do you think Trump will accept the election result, and what could happen if he doesn't win?
No, he's not going to accept it. He's made it very clear. He's still not accepted the last loss. How is he going to accept this loss? He's been revving up the public opinion, generally telling people that they'll have to fight for it. But the question is, will the I believe the institutions are much better prepared this time around. They've taken corrective measures. They've made sure that vital people who have to take decisions are balanced kind of people, and that you cannot just use the procedure to overturn the counting that quickly or stall it or halt it. Some steps have been taken. Now, although what happens in case of the US is, because it's a federal system, so it varies from state to state. So there would be some states where the Republicans are more powerful. They will still try to step in the way, but those may be the states they are winning. Because you see, again, as you said, because of the swing states, For instance, California goes to the Democrats, but it doesn't matter. So that's why you can call the election well before the Californian votes are counted, because bulk of the other things have come in. So what really matters are the swing states. And once those are coming in the way of Harris, I think then the news channels are able to call it. So I think Trump will try his best, but he's not the president this time. Somebody else is the president. So they have residual powers. And even last time, the US systems held. So it may go up to the Supreme Court, like in case of George W. Bush. And there we saw that the Supreme Court took a long time, and this Supreme Court will tend to go with Trump. So they may do that Florida kind of thing, which happened in 2000. But that would depend on, if really something is available to really take up to that level.
Right. Christopher, do you think the early voting trends, the fact that 75 million Americans and more have actually voted in early voting, does this somehow show enthusiasm about Kamala Harris, a fear that there will be violence, a very hard stand on immigration, what America stands for in case Donald Trump wins the election? Do you think voters are wary of that as well? And that's why we've seen people, women, coming out in large numbers?
Well, it's tough to discern just from the numbers about who is doing the voting. We have some evidence for that in a few states. It's clear now both parties are trying to get their members to the polls early. Once they're to the polls, you know that it's done. You don't have to worry about mobilizing them on Tuesday, the day of the election. The former president, Trump, was somewhat suspicious of early voting, absentee balloting last time around, but this time he's encouraged his supporters to get to the polls early. One reason we don't know the net effect of that is because he may just be what we call cannibalizing the people that would have showed up for him anyway on Tuesdays. So you're banking a lot of votes early. That's good. Those people are now reliably voted. But they might have been pretty good at showing up on Tuesday anyway. And so instead, you've just taken your surefire voters and got them to the polls. But the people that are more marginal, those are the ones that are likely to decide the election.
Right. Let me also go across to Brian. Brian, we heard a dark message from Donald Trump. He said, I should not have left the White House in 2020 after losing the elections. He also went on to say that I wouldn't mind if someone were to shoot through all the fake news against me. How do you read these statements? Because they made headlines across national media in the United States.
Well, Donald Trump is a terrible divider. He's always been that way. This is why he's lost the popular vote in 2016, 2020. And why the midterms were a disaster for Republicans, which usually should have won that during a Democratic president. So he's a hateful man. He's a dark person. He is but he has this incredible hold on on his supporters, and that's in large part because of the Democrats' weaknesses. I mean, we're talking about Kamala Harris. A year ago, people were talking about dumping her from the ticket because she seemed weak. She's gotten a makeover, and she's coming on a bit stronger. But a lot of people associate, rightly or wrongly, Democratic policies with economic hard times, even though the reality shows, as the economist pointed out, that the American economy is going gangbusters. Inflation is down, and the so-called Trump boom was a lot of it driven by driving up the debt and giving tax cuts to the richest. I mean, I know we're not talking about India, but economists had a very interesting poll since we have an Indian audience, and I'm just wondering if you think it's accurate. They said the majority of Indians would prefer Trump over Harris, even though she's South Indian. That's surprising. And also would prefer Russia to defeat Ukraine and would prefer China to be the dominant superpower instead of the U.S. Do you think that reflects Indian sentiment as you understand it?
No, I don't think so. The Indian sentiment would be would be interesting. So I'm going to take a short break at this point, but when we return, we'll speak more about the US elections, where things stand, and what we can expect over the next 24 to 48 hours. Right, welcome back to our special broadcast. We still have with us senior journalist Brian Bonner, Christopher Clary, Associate Professor of Political Science at the University of Albany. Also with us is former diplomat K.C. Singh. Ambassador K.C. Singh, if I were to come back to you, which are the swing states which you will really be watching out for? Iowa is a state everyone is talking about because a crucial opinion poll and a very renowned pollster in the United States has said that Kamala Harris is now in the lead over there. Do you think Iowa will be the only state to watch out for?
No, that will come much later. I think the one to watch out for is Pennsylvania. That's for one. And then the lake ones, which is, Michigan and Wisconsin and the ones on top. New York, of course, we know that goes anywhere to the Democrats. So the East Coast is what you watch first. Florida traditionally goes to the Republicans, so that doesn't matter. So Georgia, because it came last time to the Democrats, it'll be interesting to see if there's any shift there. But North Carolina, which went against Trump, went for Trump last time, there is some indication that that may be moving. If that moves, so if out of these 4 or 5 on the East Coast, if even 3 or 4 come, I think the game is over.
Right. Interesting. Let me go back to Brian. Brian, when it comes to the Ukraine war, how important an issue is it for Americans in this election? The Republicans have a different view as far as America's continued support to Ukraine is concerned. Kamala Harris is going to support Ukraine in its effort to defend itself. Do you think this is a major issue dividing voters? As an American, do you feel very strongly about this?
I feel strongly about it. I still think, and this Economist poll I cited shows that a majority of people in the world from different nations do support Ukraine because they're the victim of this war, not the aggressor. But I think as a campaign issue, it's not even in the top 3 issues. I mean, it's inflation, it's the economy, it's immigration. Those would be the top 3 issues. Now, it's very interesting. Ukrainians see Kamala Harris as being a continuation of the Joe Biden policies of support, but we really don't know what she's going to do. That is not clear whether she's going to just continue on, which is not entirely popular in Ukraine because they feel that Biden has been timid and sort of given Ukraine enough to stay in the fight, but not to win, and they're bleeding out. Now, Trump has a long and a terrible record with Ukraine. It's felt that he doesn't really care about Ukraine, but because more Ukrainians want this war to end if they can get security guarantees, they find it maybe a tantalizing risk that Donald Trump has talked about wanting to end this war quickly. Now, if he can pressure Russia strong enough to end the war in such a way that Kiev can live with, a minority, I would say, but enough Ukrainians are so tired of the war and want peace so badly that they're willing to have something different. I mean, if the West is not going to give, if Ukraine's allies are not going to give everything they need to win, then obviously we have to have some kind of a settlement that would be not just a short-term ceasefire, but some kind of a long-term settlement so Ukrainians can live in peace and not have to worry about Russian invasion. And that requires security guarantees. So that's the choices we have. Obviously, Ukrainians are very reluctant to talk publicly about supporting Democrats or Republicans because they've got burned on it in the past. And generally, while Ukraine is not the most important issue, there is always, historically, there has been bipartisan strong support for Ukraine as an independent nation. And Ukrainians don't want to do anything to spoil that with either the Republicans or the Democrats.
All right. Lots at stake in this election as far as domestic policy and the economy in the United States and geopolitics as well. But first of all, we have to discuss what happens on the ballot in the United States. That's all the time we had on this special broadcast. I'd like to thank Ambassador Casey Singh, Christopher Clary and Brian for joining us on the program. We'll be right back.